Welcome to Soul Retrieval for Childhood Trauma, a neuroscience approach to healing with your host, Kimberly Beekman. With the right tools, healing long-term trauma is completely possible. The childhood trauma gets trapped as trauma packets deep within the body. Learn to clear these packets from your body, rewire your brain, and reconnect your soul. Kim's Inner Alignment Soul Retrieval System is a 6-layered approach addressing every layer of the body, healing the root cause. Join in as Kim expands boundaries in the field of trauma recovery with a revolutionary 2-month program. Take a deep dive into healing anxiety and depression with Kim on the Soul Retrieval for Childhood Trauma show. It all starts now.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Pat, and I get to really join Kimberly here for this amazing show. It's incredible opening. And I'm going to kick it back to Kimberly here in a minute. But I want to say something real quick. This morning I had an experience with 2 of my friends. And I'm so thrilled there's somebody like Kimberly Beekman in the world. Because I wish we had sort of a trauma radar screen where we knew something would come up and we could be aware. Actually, Kimberly has developed this, but we could be aware and we could be mindful, and we know that something has to be addressed. Because what if your childhood trauma is creating your depression and anxiety? And I want to tell you, Kimberly, this hit me the other day, last night, actually. I was watching a show. I love to study animals, especially when it comes to my totem animals. So anything about wolves or werewolves, I'm watching right out of the gate. But the degree by which anxiety has become prominent in various characters across the board, whether they're in books, best-selling books, Hollywood blockbusters, television shows, the degree by which anxiety is talked about and not even understood, it's just a little bit daunting to me. Are you finding that?
Yeah, I think it's amazing, Pat. First of all, thank you for having me. It's so good to be here with you. So we look around and anxiety and depression have become the norm. We see our teenagers really coming deeply into anxiety and depression at a greater and greater rates. Suicidal ideation is higher. And really what I see in the work that I do in the world is that people have just accepted this certain level of unhappiness and anxiety and depression. And it's really everywhere. I mean, all of us are friends or care deeply about someone who's struggling in severe anxiety or depression. And I'm sure there are many causes for this, but the primary cause that we see is childhood trauma stored in the body, reverberating into daily life. And so when we all are walking around with either small t trauma, which is I got, made fun of on the playground, or big T trauma, which is abuse, neglect, harassment, big hurts. These things really are very much, the body keeps the score. Bessel van der Kolk has done a really good job helping us understand these experiences are stored deeply in the body, and they will reverberate into the present moment, causing kind of this umbrella feeling of angst or loneliness or sadness or deep despair. Which we'll label as anxiety or depression. But as I've worked with this over many years, the last 10 years specifically, we've been able to kind of really break down what the root cause is and begin to start working with it at root cause, which gives me so much hope that it's not something that everyone has to deal with for a lifetime. It's not a lifetime sentence to be unhappy.
Yeah. Look, for those of you just tuning in, let me just say a little bit about Kimberly Beekman, if you're just tuning in. First of all, you're in front of renowned expert in this field. Whether you've read her books, you've participated in her certifications, there's a reason that I was really excited to have her on and be part of the network. The other thing, though, is when you take a look at all of the different ways that Kimberly has been able to show up, whether you know her as a shamanic practitioner, spiritual teacher, an author, uh, fabulous, fabulous meditation teacher, trainer, she has a passion, which has now included, and for those of you that know this, she has created a platform to walk you through the way to get at that root cause so that you can live the life you want.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter which way you know Kimberly, whether you've read her book, but the one thing she and I do have in common that make us extremely passionate about this topic is we understand mental health or the lack thereof at a very personal level. We're not just doing the show today because there's some book we want you to pull off. We're showing up today, and Kimberly shows up every day because she's not just passionate about this, she understands what happens through childhood trauma. Both of us have that in our history. But what happens when that happens, and unless you can get some help to figure it out, maybe breathing exercises help you with your anxiety in the moment, they're not going to get at the root cause that's underneath that. And so whatever the tools you use from neuroscience or mental health, in 30 years she's been doing this, she's looked at childhood trauma recovery, she's looked at science. We love science. She and I could do a whole show on the science of this. The bottom line is this: alignment soul retrieval system, alignment soul, even in the dialogue of what she's created, she gets that it's you, the whole you. That's what today's episode's about. It's the whole you. And it does show up. It showed up on a call this morning between myself, two other people, and an attorney. And, you could see it in the body language. The question is, what are we going to do? Because when you're touched, Kimberly, look, when you and I are touched by something like this, and of course, I'm Monday morning quarterbacking right now. I mean, what that means is I'm kind of like sitting here, like looking back. I had no clue what was going on. Are you kidding me? A lifetime of alcohol. I had no clue about that. But we are now at epidemic levels with this.
Yeah.
We have to get better.
I agree. And I think, I have a bold view on this, but I think we all have stored experiences from our childhood that we are playing out in our marriages and our parenting and our work lives, in our social connections. So we all have some level of experience that's creating resistance in our present moment. And I think a lot of people, through our mental health, we've done a lot of analysis paralysis about the issues that are limiting us. Oh, this relates to my mother, and I never got the love I wanted. And I think that's an important precursor. It's good preliminary work, but analyzing our issues does not get down to the root. I have this analogy that having stored vibration or stored trauma in our bodies is like there's a fire in the basement of the house and it's kicking up smoke to the upper floors of the house. And we're all doing our yoga and we're meditating and we're blowing the smoke out of the upper floors of the house and we're exhausting ourselves in the blowing of the smoke. And no matter what, the smoke continues to reappear and we're exhausted and we're like, why am I still in angst? Why am I still unhappy? And then we go to therapy and we're sitting on the roof looking down and we're like, yep, there's a fire. Yep, there's some smoke. And we can see it and we can understand it, which is great, but it doesn't put the smoke. It doesn't clear the smoke permanently or put the fire out in the basement. And I think that's what we're talking about today, is looking at a modality to put the fire out in the basement, so we're not consistently overlaying our issues into the present moment. And so we can finally have a little peace and feel connected to ourselves.
I love that, because when we come back, we're going to talk with you about the system you've created. And this is very important. You know, I grew up with half my family from the deep South, and one of the sayings that would always happen around the fire to us girls and everybody there is like, somebody would always say, I just want to tell y'all children that here's the deal. Those embers, boy, do they burn hot, and do they burn long,
Yeah.
even if you can't see them. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we're gonna see. I want to introduce you to what Kimberly has discovered and has been using. Because if we don't get at that, what she just beautifully described, if we don't get there, how long does it take for that ember to ignite something again? Do we even know that that's happening? Did we even know we still had that little ember down there just kind of working its way? And then how does it show up in life? Because those are the people, the clients. This is the work that Kimberly Beekman does. Let's take a short break, everybody. We'll be right back. And it's so great to have all of you tune us in, turn us on. Look, this is a show I've been waiting to really have and go live. Kimberly Beekman is joining me here today. You know, just saying what I'm going to say is like an understatement, but I wanted to say it because when you're someone that has developed a system that enables people like me to really get at the core issue of something that could be blocking, you know, my vision, my dream, my future, my relationship, it doesn't matter, my sport, you know, anything in that where we can get help from understanding it and getting a solution and a remedy. This is where we are right now, because what's happening in the world is repetitive. There's a recidivative nature to it. You know, people are coming out of the past 3 or 4 years. They're not coming out without having incidences, if I might say, of things. That's another show. We can do the science on that. But what if you had a way? What if you could learn a way? And then what if you could teach others about that way? That's what Kimberly, before we do this and before we go on,
Yeah.
this is really important. This is important because there are things that happen. What did you call it? The big T and the little T,
Yeah.
which I hope you go into. A lot of times we want to blow off the little T. But when I take a look at the body of work you've done, your book, you lay this out beautifully. How do people find out about what you've done? How did they get the book? How do they connect with you? All of that.
Yeah. So my website is kimberlybeekman.com, and on my website, you'll see a link to my book, Inner Alignment, Soul Retrieval for Healing Childhood Trauma, which basically outlines the entire system, which we're probably going to talk more about, and goes into the 6 layers of the body and where trauma is stored in the 6 layers of the body. Because if we don't address trauma at all 6 layers of the body, then it will feel the remnants of the trauma in our lives. So kimberlybeekman.com, and that's where you'll find a link to my book and a short overview, as well as a way to book a healing blueprint session with me. So often when people hear about this process, they're like, okay, yeah, ready. But it's important that I know that I can help someone, that the issues that are or have arisen are in fact because of childhood trauma. And so I do a 30-minute call to see if our work actually would help someone. We have a 95% success rate, meaning 95% of the people that enroll in a 2-month intensive to heal childhood trauma actually come out the other side relieved of the anxiety or the depression or the core issues that they came to us with. And the reason for that is we are really clear about who we can help and who we can't help. And so that's why we do, you can't just enroll for our programs off of our website, because we want to be sure that whoever we take on, we are truly going to get them to the other side of what's showing up for them.
Yeah. I think it's so important. It's so interesting. And the other thing is, if you could talk about this for a little bit and you take us through the system, or at least parts of it, is I think most of us feel we're blindsided or surprised when issues come up. Yet that ember has been smoldering in there for a while, but
Yeah.
yet it does catch us off guard. I mean, it really does. It's fascinating. I was looking back, somebody asked me a question. They heard me make this comment the other day on a show that when I was younger, I liked to drag race cars down Highway 78 before it was finished in New Jersey. Right. So they heard me say that. And, they automatically went to, okay, she's like a danger freak in extreme sport. And I need to think about that for a minute. What was my relationship with cars? Well, my relationship with cars had to do with the only thing that I could be close to my dad about.
Mhm.
That's it. Never home. And when he was home, he was in the garage becoming a mechanic.
Mhm.
And it was a fascinating thing, right? So I learned all about that. I was very good as a driver. But what made me take those kinds of risks? That's the underlying little thing in there, right?
Yeah.
That most people never get to. Now,
Yeah.
we're not going to do the show about me, but it's many things like that.
Yeah. In fact, we call those experiences trauma packets. Whether it's big T trauma or little t trauma, or whether it's just a frozen experience in the body, what happens is somewhere before we have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, which doesn't happen until we're 25 years old, but somewhere where we're young, 4, 5, 6 years old, we have an experience. And the experience could be a positive experience. Oh, liking cars gives me the love from daddy, right? Or it can be a very negative experience, which is if I do something wrong, I'm going to lose mom's love, right? So I broke something, or I got glitter glue on the table, and then boom, mom's angry and I'm unsafe. And so at 6 years old, that experience of mom being angry with me gets frozen in my body, and my thoughts of I'm not loved if I do something wrong, or in the fight or flight in my nervous system, or the fear of unlovableness, or the anxiety or the energy in my chest, or the feeling of unworthiness, all gets auto-associated with each other and really held deeply in the body. And that, what we call a trauma packet, will continue to reverberate into all of the present moments from that point on. And we start to create belief systems as we grow up. We're like, oh, don't do anything wrong, you won't get approval. Oh, don't do anything wrong, they won't like you. And next thing you know, we become a perfectionist, right? And so we develop behavioral patterns and neurosynaptic connections and neurochemistry in our bodies, which totally set up the physics of our life around that core experience. And then we spend our entire lives replaying, for example, that perfectionism at my work, in my parenting, in my partnerships, in every place. And we call that unworthiness. And then soon I can never feel good enough. And I then say I have anxiety, right? But the truth is, I have an unworthiness trauma packet frozen deep within my body that continues to get reactivated in every present moment. And I play out that and a couple of other trauma packet patterns throughout my life. And the truth is, those patterns are built on 6-year-old thoughts, 6-year-old feelings, 6-year-old nervous system wiring, and a 6-year-old consciousness of how the world works. And here I am, let's say at 48 years old, like, why do I have this? Why do I feel like I can never do anything good enough?
Yeah.
And when I explain this to people, Dr. Pat, they are like, yes, Yes, that's totally what's going on. It's a vibrational sensation living and reverberating and getting overlaid on my present moment. And no matter how much I go to therapy and analyze my relationship with my boss, this deep feeling of unworthiness persists. And our description of that is it's a trauma packet that intersects all 6 layers of the body deep within, I'm going to use a woo-woo word, in the second dimension of consciousness, meaning it's not wired into the prefrontal cortex in the mental body. It's deep within the tissue or the cells of the body. And so no matter how much we understand it and use positive affirmations and tell us how good we are, it doesn't override this deep feeling of not enoughness, not safe enough, not connected enough, not worthy enough, not lovable enough, not mattering enough, whatever our flavor, our unique flavor of unworthiness is.
It's so fascinating. You're going to love this story. I had a friend call me and we were just chatting and she said, yeah, you know what happened to, I'm just going to make up the name for confidence. You know what happened to my granddaughter, Mary? I said, no, what happened to Mary? Because I grew up with Mary, until, right. I know Mary very well. Mary had a complete meltdown, complete anxiety attack. And they had to, Mary, what is Mary now? 8, 9, maybe she's 9, 10-ish, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what happened? Very casually, but then my brain went off because I knew I was doing this show with you. Very casually, she says, oh, somebody in her classroom was coughing. And I said, oh, okay. So did you get her some help on that? I'm not going to go into the whole story, but the fact that I asked the question, did you get her some help on that? My friend said, why? And I said, think about this for a minute. Your 9-year-old granddaughter's in class and somebody next to her coughed and she had a complete panic attack. You think maybe somebody should talk to her? Now, look, I know better in psychology to jump to that conclusion. And for all of you that are listening to this, I'm not giving you, she's not my client, and I'm not giving you a psychological explanation, but something triggered her, Kimberly.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you, but if that were if that were any relative of mine at 8 or 10 years old that had a panic attack, I'd certainly want to know why. But that's just one example.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a big T, a little T. All I know is that a 9-year-old couldn't stay in class.
So this is really interesting. So by 9, this child probably has had previous experiences that are now stored in her body that are reactivating. And so she got triggered into a trauma packet. The interesting thing from my inner alignment perspective about panic attacks is a vibration will show up and then someone will be afraid of that vibration because trauma packets don't make sense to us if we're not aware of it. And then a panic attack is the fear of the fear. And so the escalation of the nervous system and then the looping of that from the fear of the fear. We've done some really beautiful work with panic attacks and with teens, and we can talk about that as soon as we come back from the break.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because what this show is really about, and the work, Kimberly, you do, is we have to start at a place of awareness. We have to start. I'm not even saying you have to be awake. I'm just saying you have to have a little bit of awareness about yourself and about others. But it's a tough one when we have to face ourselves in the mirror. It really is. And it's tough because we don't have the solution you're going to talk about when we come back.
Yeah.
A lot of times, if you've ever been in that state, and for years I was in that state, I couldn't walk through a park. I couldn't walk through any park that looked like Central Park in New York, because when I was younger, We were part of an attack in that park, and I had to get some work done on that. Now, of course, I say work, probably you could have helped me a lot easier and a lot sooner. When we come back, how do you know the signs? How do you know what the impact is? What can you do? And why is what Kimberly Beekman talking about so powerfully important and provides a solution that can help us, not just at the symptom level, the moment where you're not afraid, but get to understand it at a way where you're not afraid anymore.
Yeah.
Let's take a short break, everybody. We'll be right back. Back. Before we keep going, I mean, Kimberly Beekman has signed up and said yes to a body of work that is so needed in the world today for so many reasons. I mean, we could spend an entire show talking about what they are. All you need to do is read the headlines from today or yesterday, and you'll understand that there are things being established in these layers, these experiences, these traumatic experiences. They are getting to layers that we don't fully understand. But if you're Kimberly Beekman, you do, and you help people with them. Before we talk about these layers, and the headlines are just filled with them. They're just absolutely filled. But how do we find out about you? Tell us about that again. How did they get a copy? Hold your book cover up again. That's such an amazing book cover.
Sure. So this book here is Inner Alignment Soul Retrieval for Healing Childhood Trauma, available on Amazon. And the link is off of the About page in my website, which is kimberlybeekman.com. So there people can read about the inner work, the inner transformation work that we do to help people get to the other side of anxiety and depression. And we also train coaches and healers in this trauma-informed work, because we really see this work, we'll say, augmenting the mental health field's work. I think once someone goes through their 10 years of therapy, of repeating the stories and really having an understanding of what's going on or what their past was, that's when it's time to actually dig into root cause. And as I was speaking before the break, the root cause of anxiety and depression most often is childhood trauma stored in the body and really activated on every layer of the body. So let me describe what I mean by every layer of the body. So when a 6-year-old feels like, oh, mommy's mad at me, I did something wrong. If I do something wrong, I won't get love. Right? That experience gets wired on the mental layer of the body. In terms of that 6-year-old's thoughts, the thoughts of, if I do something wrong, I'm not loved, gets wired in. The emotion is fear and a sense of unlovability and this unworthy feeling in the body. So emotionally, this 6-year-old is feeling unloved. So on the mental and emotional layer of the body, we have fear of unloved. We have thoughts around why I'm unlovable, right? The physical nervous system goes into a fight or flight response, and they develop fight, flight, fawn, freeze, whatever it is this 6-year-old does. In this case, this 6-year-old has a fight response and is going to do things perfectly and get things right for the rest of her life, right? So the nervous system is involved. So we've got the mental, emotional, and physical layers of the body. And we can't ignore the fact that the chakra and the energetic system, the pranic system, is effective. So now we have an over excess imbalanced will chakra that's all fired up, right? And the root chakra feels weak and unsafe. And so there's an imbalance that's created energetically. So those are the lower 4 layers of the body. And typically the 5th layer, which is the awareness layer of the body, the wisdom body, the part of us that can see, oh, I'm having a reaction. That's not active in the 6-year-old. Neither is that sense of divine love and care and understanding of who she is beyond what she does. So when I talk about the 6 layers of the body and how a trauma packet is really wired up, on every layer of the body, Josie, that little girl, has wired up, I'm not good enough. And no matter what I do, I can never get the love. So when we talk about a trauma packet, we're looking at every layer of that little girl wired up and having an activation of that thought, that belief, that feeling, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, energetically, in terms of her nervous system. And so that being stored in the body suggests that we cannot heal this from just one layer of the body.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So a lot of
Yeah,
people are going at this with Reiki for the pranic layer or therapy for the mental layer, right? So there's a lot of one layer modalities that really aren't reaching the core of the trauma packet stored deeply within.
Yeah, Einstein said it best. I mean, I regurgitate this and I paraphrase it, and he's going to forgive me right now. But basically, he's saying you can't solve the problem at the layer it was created. He didn't say layer, but I'm saying it. And basically people interpret that. But a problem may start on the surface at a point, and it may seem benign. It may seem, look, your dad comes home and he puts his fist through the wall, and you kind of get normalized to it, pounds on the table until you work for a boss.
Right.
Like I did.
Yeah.
And your boss comes in and he starts his board meetings pounding on the table.
Right.
And you become immobilized. Now, where did it start? Pounding on the wall. But it didn't stop there. If I heard you correctly, it went from there and went into a number of layers.
Yeah.
That stayed kind of buried in there until my boss decides he's pounding on the table.
So what's interesting is that pound activates the nervous system and then reactivates the thoughts of I'm bad or I'm unsafe, and that fear that's on the emotional layer of the body, and the root chakra all of a sudden is weak in the board meeting just because the fist hit the table, right? So all of those auto-associated layers will reactivate with just one layer activate. Yeah. One layer activates and all of them will reactivate. And next thing you know, now without a level of awareness, you'll think you're scared of your boss. You won't know at that moment there's an old vibration that's getting reactivated and projected into this situation because your nervous system is telling you, run, go, freeze.
I love the way you described it, because that example is so beautiful. Because when I think about it, and boy, I just had a flashback to it. I wasn't sitting by my boss, and I knew this guy. I know this behavior, right?
Yeah.
But one of my associates was, and she looked petrified. Yeah. I mean, trembling. And so this is interesting. I don't know if it relates to this, but I'll tell you, now that I'm thinking about it, what happened with that was, I mean, he didn't stop. You could see she was shaken. And I jumped up and I just let him have it. I mean, what my reaction to that triggered a reaction that was very back there, very old. Because it wasn't so much his pounding that got to me, because I was, I got that. But when I saw her panic, it hit me. Like, that was the look my brother used to have.
Right. So she went into a freeze response. You went into your typical fight response for your brother. And next thing you know, we're in a meeting at work and we're all reacting. We're all going into old trauma behavioral patterns.
Yeah.
Dr. Pat, I can't tell you how often someone who's been through therapy for 10 years and analyzed it from every angle will come to us and say, I'm guessing this is childhood trauma related. Can you help me get to the root here and clear this from my body so that I'm not feeling like I have to run away at work, or so I don't feel traumatized in my work environment or in my marriage environment, or with my dysregulated kid who's on the spectrum, right? So we might even know, oh, this is a child. I know that I don't need to run for the hills for my life. However, I cannot regulate myself because I'm in a trauma response because of my child in a dysregulated state. So we can't control whether a trauma packet gets reactivated. Now we can do our breath work and we can re-regulate our nervous system and call off the troops. We can do that, but that can be exhausting. And wouldn't it be easier if we can neutralize the experience that's stored in the body so that when the person yells at work, our body is not running for hills in that flight response? And that's the essence of what my passion and what my mission in this world is I see so many people repeating these behavioral patterns. They're suffering at work, they're suffering in marriage, they're suffering in their partnerships, in all of these spaces. And to me, it's unnecessary suffering. It's an old vibration that when we get in, and this kind of gets to that next piece of like, what do you do about these 6-layered response trauma packets? But from my perspective, this person could not react to their boss within 2 months of working on this issue if they're working on it from the place where the issue exists, which is in the trauma.
And we didn't even talk about this proximity, but I want to go to this right here now. I want to switch because we've been talking about a lot of physical things, and I'm going to go ahead and skip the break. But I want to talk about something that's not as tangible. Let's talk about this because there's a reason I studied it for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Something as simple as a broken promise. I'm not pounding on the desk.
Yeah.
A pattern of broken promises.
Yeah.
Now,
so this is where
what I'm saying.
Yeah, the energetic body. So the pounding on the desk was my root chakra is unsafe, right? It's more of a primal survival response. But a broken promise can register. This is the most fascinating thing. I worked with a set of twins. And I worked in the trauma packets of each of the twins. Now, these two twins went everywhere together. They had the same experiences, but the way each of the twins internalized the traumas that happened were completely different. So a broken promise in one person can be in the sacral chakra of, I didn't get the connection and I feel neglected, right? So it can register deep within the sacral, whereas someone else might register it in the throat chakra of, I don't matter. Like that person didn't show up for me and I don't matter. So the trauma packets are stored in different places based on our karma, based on our life experiences, based on what our soul is here to learn in this lifetime. There is a spiritual path. And so a broken promise is a lack of something. What was it? A lack of love, a lack of connection, a lack of feeling like I matter, right? Either way, it got stored as I'm not lovable, I'm not connected. So if I were in a healing blueprint session with someone, I'd say, what would be the worst part about that broken promise? So I could listen to where that trauma packet is stored in the body, because within minutes, someone can give me enough information for me to hear the trauma packet, to hear where the trauma packet is, and to know really, I can I can hear just in the present moment what someone's struggling with, and I can see the entire makeup and the whole patterning of what happened in that person's childhood. I don't know, I'm not psychic, but I can read patterns. So I can hear, well, mom or dad or some caregiver really didn't give that sense of I'm meaningful and I matter. And because of that, the whole life trajectory was set up because of not feeling like what insert trauma packet meaning here, right? Does that make sense, Doctor?
It does make sense. And there's a reason I brought it up because, while we were talking a lot about physical things, these are the things that are the most, how should I say it? Mysterious. And
Yeah.
the reason I'm bringing it up is because it happens all the time. And this is just one of these things. Let's just stay with this for a minute. How does it manifest as you get older? Well, let's talk about an example, and you can help with this. I'm in my new relationship and I'm in there with my partner, and my partner says, honey, I promised to make you dinner tonight. Okay. And you kind of like, to you, that's a big dang deal for some strange reason, which you're going to tell me about in a minute. And then honey doesn't come home and doesn't make dinner. Now, how many degrees of this can there be? Honey comes home and buys dinner, but doesn't make dinner. Is that a broken promise? Honey totally forgets and doesn't have dinner at all. That's a broken promise. Now, for those of you listening, is it an extreme version for you to go from that to I don't trust you anymore, honey? Now, if you think that's a far stretch, it might be for you. But think about people. A simple promise. Kids are made promises all the time. What is the impact of making promises? Schools making promises, anybody making promises to the age range that Kimberly's talking about. How does that manifest and what is the ripple effect? You see, these are the things we don't talk about very much. I happen to study this 10 years. I have 1,200 pages of interview notes that I wouldn't be able to make sense out of, but certainly if I sent them to you, you would. But we think it's benign. Gee, little Kimberly, I'm going to take you to that ball game. Gee, mom, dad, isn't the ball game today? Yeah, but I got it. Right. This is going on left and right now because everybody, what do you make of that little scenario there?
Yeah. So here's what I make of that. So if you have someone that feels like they're getting enough love and their needs are met in that relationship, that promise thing may be like water off a duck's back. Oh, you said you were we're not going to do that. Okay, no problem. But for someone that has trauma stored in their body from a big promise that meant the world at 4 years old, and then dad didn't show up for that. Even if it was going to Disney World, we're going to go to Disney World. Oh, we're not going to Disney World. I mean, it can be something benign, Dr. Pat. So imagine what the big T traumas will create. So something that was big for a 4-year-old, then promises become a thing in that person's life. Not everybody has stuff around promises, right? Why do I have something around promises? Well, there's a trauma packet in there around people keeping their word and people showing up and people caring, right? Probably because there wasn't enough of that. But again, understanding that does not make promises any less of a hot topic in that individual's life. They can analyze it, they can talk about it for decades, but still promises will be a big deal to that person. And that gets to, well, then what do you do about that? If there's something like, I have a real issue around promises, you might even have self-awareness around the issue around promises, but still it really feels like you're going to die when someone breaks their promise. And that's what's the vibration within a trauma packet, a 4-year-old trauma packet. There is this, I feel like I'm going to die. We call that a death fear. And that's why trauma packets are such a big deal. As a 4-year-old, dad not following through on that big promise does feel like the 4-year-old does feel like they're not going to survive the day. And that's what gets stored. And that's why then promises become a big thing. And all of life has become this big thing of broken promises because of the hurt and the pain and the death fear. So the question is, do we then make sure no one around us, do we fix it externally and say, listen, I need you to never break a promise and you to never break a promise and you to, and we set up our lives so that we only surround ourselves by people who take promises seriously? Or do we work the issue within ourselves so we don't even notice if someone promised something or not, because we've healed that within ourselves? And there are 2 aspects to healing the promise trauma packet, we'll call it. The first is we need to get deep within that body-based trauma and start to work with the part of ourselves that felt unloved because of the trauma that was broken, or felt left, or felt broken, or like they were going to die. And when we go into that space, we can't just work the thoughts. We can't just work the feelings. We have to work all 6 layers. So we have to work with the thoughts and the feelings around the broken promise. We have to work with the nervous system. We have to work with our awareness and our consciousness. We have to work with the divine in that space, whatever that is for any given person. And we have to bridge our 40-year-old understanding of promises or promise. Some people can make promises, some people break promises, all of the understanding, and bridge it into the trauma packet, because what we know often does not bridge into the body-based trauma. And so when we go into the trauma packet through what I call the soul retrieval process, we can start to work with those thoughts and those feelings, that abandonment, the hurt, the death fear, and the consciousness of the whatever part of ourselves. And usually it's so simple, but also so tender.
Yeah.
That piece. And often the divine is not there, whether the divine is consciousness or the light or Jesus or Buddha or whatever divine is for someone, that needs to bridge as well into the space. And that's why single layer modalities can't really get in there and bring the joy and the love back, because every aspect needs to be dealt with within that deep body-based experience. Now, here's the problem, is you can do that and you can feel the, I'm good, I'm safe, I'm loved, I'm loved no matter where there's a promise or not. And you can build those new neural pathways in the brain and start sending out those new hormones and neurotransmitters into the cells. However, if you don't practice, now we go to the whole Joe Dispenza world of the neuroscience of healing. If you don't practice those new neural pathways and those new understandings that were built very deeply within self, then after 5 days, those new neural pathways will start to truncate. And even though there was some healing, the brain and the body needs to get on board and get neurosynaptically wired to the healing of the 6 layers, which means the mind needs to think about that healing, the emotions need to be felt about how lovable I am, and the energetics of peace need to be activated and practiced, and that connection with self needs to be anchored in, and that feeling of bliss needs to be practiced. And we call that rewiring. And we know it takes 40 to 60 days from that point to rewire someone back to the feeling of healed. And so we need to get into the trauma packet to work those issues, that broken promise issue. But we also need to rewire all 6 layers of the body for 40 to 60 days to sustain the feeling of healing. which is really often one, maybe the other, maybe a couple layers are being worked, but the thorough aspect of working all 6 layers in the trauma packet and then sustaining the wiring of this on all layers for a prolonged period of time is typically not happening, which is why people feel stuck.
Yeah. And look, we're going to do other shows on this and we're going to talk more about it, because people often wonder, and you hear them say, oh my gosh, I thought I dealt with that, right? I mean, that's a common like little phrase that's used.
Totally.
But it's explained beautifully by you and by what you've created to help people, because it is multidimensional. I mean, and we do think we're fixed after 4 or 5 days and things are really good. But we are talking about trauma.
Yeah.
And that's the key. Kimberly, thank you so much for today. I've got a couple of questions left. One is, most importantly, how do we find out about you? And then the second is, I'd love to know your personal message, what you'd like to leave us with today.
Yeah. So you can find me at www.kimberlybeekman.com, and that's where the access to all kinds of YouTube and meditations and such are. And I guess what I want to leave you with today is hope. Hope that this understanding of the trauma packets and the 6 layers gives us an understanding that trauma can be healed, anxiety and depression can be healed, and we're not stuck with it. Yeah.
Thank you. And I want to leave you with something. This conversation about trauma goes deep for those of you out there. And the moral to this story about the promises is the following. If you're going to study something that was a childhood trauma, and you take that on to really study it, and you spend 10 years studying it, and you're asked to do extraordinary research on it, interviewing hundreds of people, hearing their stories, and you know that this for you is an important conversation, and then you're asked to do postdoctoral work, and then you're asked to ... Don't be surprised if when you're done, you take that black book of your award-winning research publication and you put it on the bottom shelf of the farthest bookshelf you have until somebody like a Jessica finds it and says, I didn't know you wrote a book. See, what Kimberly is talking about today, it's not just fight or flight of body. It's fight and flight at every level she talked about. And we don't have to live that way. We don't have to continue with that level of suffering. And I say that because Kimberly has created a way for us not to do that. Please check in with yourself, check in with others. Get yourself some relief that you deserve. Childhood trauma does not have to be a way of life. Kimberly, would you agree?
I agree.
Yeah. Thank you all for tuning us in, turning us on. And just on the flip side of this really good news, I can look at that dissertation today. Thank you all for tuning us in and turning us on. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Soul Retrieval for Childhood Trauma, a neuroscience approach to healing with host Kimberly Beekman. Tune in as Kimberly expands boundaries in the field of trauma recovery. With the right tools, healing from long-term effects of past trauma is possible. Kim's inner alignment soul retrieval system is only a 2-month process unlike any other in the world.
For more information, please visit www.kimberlybeekman.com.